and to what extent, if any, is it essential to the principle of limited government? How has the writ of habeas corpus evolved in the United States? Under what circumstances, if any, might the writ of habeas corpus place an unreasonable burden on the government? Anytime you're ready.
The writ of habeas corpus translates to "you may have the body." It is one of the most important limiting principles of government because it means that no power can detain someone indefinitely and requires the government to protect individual freedoms. People under arrest should be brought into court to prove the legality of their detention. If a suspect's custody cannot be justified since no evidence is found within 48 hours, they would be set free. Habeas corpus is an example of limited government where power is restricted to protect natural rights. The government does not have any other power other than what is granted through laws from or based on the Constitution. This ensures that no one is above the consequences of the law and will face justice through due process. There are many different versions of habeas corpus throughout history, but it originated from the 39th clause of the Magna Carta signed by King John. It states that no name shall be arrested or imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of his peers and by the law of the land. This inspired the Fifth Amendment, which states that no person shall be held to answer for a capital crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. Miranda rights then evolved from the Fifth Amendment. It prevents a suspect from being compelled to self-incriminate by law enforcement when being questioned for a crime. It also protects the Sixth Amendment's right to a trial by jury and the right to an attorney.
Framers of the Constitution like Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson thought that habeas corpus should be explicitly put into Constitution. Article 1, Section 9, the suspension clause states that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases for religion or invasion the public safety may require it. There have been several instances where habeas corpus has been suspended. On September 15, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln authorized martial law and suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. Authorities could then detain rebels without a trial if they were thought to be threats to military operations.
It would become burdensome to go through due process for all suspected secessionists or slavery supporters. Although some people saw this as an abuse of power, Lincoln did get support from Congress. When Federal Circuit Court Judge Chief Justice Roger B. Taney denied the president's authority, Lincoln justified his actions through the suspension clause because he saw it as necessary to national security. President Franklin D. Roosevelt cited Lincoln's suspension to support Executive Order 9066. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States was paranoid of enemy connections. People of Japanese descent were kept in isolated camps in Hawaii and other states without a trial. Fred Korematsu, a Japanese-American man, refused to relocate to an internment camp, arguing that it was against the Fifth Amendment and that he deserves these rights as a natural citizen born in California. This led to the Supreme Court case of Korematsu v. United States, where the Supreme Court affirmed Korematsu's conviction of violating the order. The Detainee Treatment Act of 2005 and the Military Commissions Act of 2006 also found ways of circumventing habeas corpus. The act allowed the United States to hold a suspected terrorist in Guantanamo Bay prison camp without access to federal courts due to national security. Instead, the suspects had to go through military commissions and seek an appeal with the DC Circuit Court. That concludes our presentation.
It's fantastic timing. Well done. You guys, you touched on two of the most famous cases of the suspension of habeas corpus, FDR and Lincoln. And I think you did a fine job laying out the facts and the historic context. Could you evaluate it for me? Do you think that Lincoln was justified in suspending habeas corpus in the middle of the Civil War?
I think that Lincoln was justified because there were some doubts about his authority to do so, but he proved the legality of suspending habeas corpus through getting support from Congress. And with the doubts from Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, he still was able to execute that plan.
I also think Lincoln was justified because, as suspension clause stated, I think it has to be flexible depending on different situation. But at that time, the country was in a war, so I think it can be justified by suspension clause.
I also do believe that President Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus was justified in that sense, because I feel that if he did not suspend habeas corpus for that time, then the result wouldn't have been the same with how history has written itself.
So then let me just ask the other part then. Same question, but for FDR and the internment camps in World War II. What do we think about that?
Like what Sion mentioned before, the suspension regarding the suspension clause, it should be flexible depending on the situation. And in that situation, during the bombing of Pearl Harbor, there wasn't much evidence that Japanese Americans had connections to United States enemies. So I do not think that was justified.
I personally think that the suspension of habeas corpus during World War II was kind of a black and white, or kind of a two-faced issue, because while I do think that the habeas corpus suspension might have been necessary, I don't believe that the internment of specific races of people were actually necessary. I think that was just an overblown issue that that racism and things like that might have played a part in at that time.
Thank you.
I'm going to walk down a little different path around the evolution of the writ of habeas corpus. You touched on in your essay some of that chronology from the Magna Carta through the US Constitution. Can you elaborate some? Has it impacted the states? In other words, so impacts federally, but then have there been impacts at the state level, state courts, state imprisonments? How do you see that, or what did you find in your research on that?
Could you clarify what you mean about states versus federal?
Yeah, so there's federal laws, and if you break them, you dealt with in federal court that the US Constitution delineates in Article 3. But then state constitutions and state laws, you go to, for example, state prison, you're in a state court, and it's not a US constitutional issue directly. And so did the writs of habeas corpus, have they had any impact on being on a person that's incarcerated in a state prison, in the state prison in Hawaii, for example? Is that available to them, or do you have to just be in a federal situation? Is that any clearer? I apologize if that's not a very clear question.
I think that habeas corpus is still applicable to state government because it is written in the Constitution, and state governments have to follow that also.
Okay. All right. Under the Supremacy Clause. Okay. Thank you very much.
Let's go back. You've alluded to it a little bit, and I think accurately, the suspension clause in Article 1, Section 9. Is that language too flexible? You referred to it needs to be flexible. Is it too flexible today in our very complex country? And I'm thinking about recent incidences, Black Lives Matter movement, social justice movements, where some areas of our country have attempted to crack down on civil rights and what. Is it too flexible? Should we tighten it up, define rebellion more narrowly?
I do not think that it should be defined more narrowly because with public safety and national security, it greatly depends on the situation. There's a wide variety of cases that differ in many different ways, and there are some things that we've never even experienced before. So I think that people should be open-minded about what the suspension clause applies to.
Is it possible that the language being so flexible, could it be abusive? Could our governments in small areas abuse our rights to do things?
Like what Emily said, I think it should be narrowed up a little bit because there's an example of habeas corpus suspension clause of habeas corpus has been abused. Like as we mentioned in the presentation, Guantanamo Bay can be one of the example because it called exception because of national security, but some people in that camp was accused without definite evidence. So many people are unguilty, but it's still in there. They have to live in inhumane condition, and they also got tortured, and they didn't have chance to do a failed trials.
Thank you. About 15
I saw that 1 second. I could ask a question, but then the time will expire. So maybe
right.
maybe I won't do that. We'll just
5 seconds, I think.
5 seconds. It's that we won't be able to get another one in. That's what I get for asking long-winded questions.
Time.
There it is.
Time.
Good job. All right.
Nicely done.
Yeah, nicely done, Hawaii. I have a couple things I jotted down that I thought was very effective. I like watching the evolution that you laid out in your presentation from the Magna Carta to habeas corpus to the habeas corpus incorporated into our Constitution to the Fifth Amendment to Miranda. I think that was a pretty clear evolution that helped show where it came from and how it got to where it is today. It's a messy issue. Like we seem to, and I personally, I think I agree with this interpretation, but lots of other people could disagree. But I agree with what you said, which was we agree that Lincoln was probably justified doing it in the Civil War, suspending habeas corpus, but FDR maybe not so much during World War II. And I think that gets at part of the it's a flexible term. It's kind of tricky to nail down. And certainly, like if you have old honest Abe Lincoln there, we trust him to do the right thing, but somebody else can come along later and take advantage of that flexibility and that uncertainty in ways that we don't approve of. And I think in answering my first follow-up question, the three of you you showed a good understanding of that kind of gray area, and being comfortable in that gray area is important because especially with constitutional issues, but certainly in life as a whole, things aren't always so clear cut. So being comfortable in that sort of gray area is important, and you guys did well with that.
Yeah, I'll add to Mr. Murphy's comments and duplicate them as well. But the three, each of you are to be commended. You did a nice job. I had written down, I enjoyed the good overview of kind of from start to more present time frame on the evolution and implementation, incorporation of the writ of habeas corpus. You were able to augment or add to each other's comments effectively. Your references to around the situation with President Lincoln and Chief Justice Taney and those references there were illustrated a good understanding of the concepts. And as Mr. Murphy just said, I mean, these are complex and not, as you can tell from the evolution of the court cases, they evolve and they kind of go up and down, and there are different challenges such as the war on terror. So you did a nice job with all of that. It was it was enjoyable to listen to you. And so certainly wish you well here as well as down the road. It's evident you'll be successful wherever that path takes you. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what my colleagues have said. You did a really nice job. Your prepared response was well organized. It was clear. You tracked the question. You made it easy for us to understand your argument, and you provided us the evidence necessary. You didn't just give us an opinion. You made an argument, and that's what this is all about, right? And there was some disagreement, and you did it in a very polite and nice way where you were disagreeing about an idea, not with the person. And we certainly need more of that in our country, and you are modeling that. I liked your, using the going all the way back to Magna Carta, right? You got this ancient idea. People are like, what's that, right? Most Americans wouldn't even have any idea what you're talking about, right? And yet you were able to then carry this historic concept into our founding and then to today, right? It's still with us. It's an active concept. And I think you recognize that it's messy, that it's going to be tough, and it's flexible and it's fluid. And we're going to need young people like you in the near future watching out for our rights and looking at what our government's doing and speaking up and speaking up eloquently as you do. And then just, watch the immigration issue, right? It's a big deal right now, and watch and see how it's happening, because I want to make sure that habeas corpus is applied by the 14th Amendment, where it says all persons, right? All persons under our jurisdiction, right? And that's everybody. And so that's going to be a big challenge to our country. And I'm glad to know that you're on our side and going to help us keep an eye on things. So thank you and good luck.
And thanks to your teacher and coaches as well. So all the best.